For this presentation, we have chosen to look at Scenario 4. We will be focusing on the current restrictions which are currently in place in youth courts, how we report on juvenile cases, what happens when a juvenile is tried in an adult court, and the reporting restrictions for juvenile ASBOs. We will also look at the consequences news organisations face when the laws are breached and what defences we have as journalists. Throughout this presentation, the main areas of law which will be covered are the Offences Against the Persons Act 1861, Children and Young Persons Act 1933, Sexual Offences Act 1996, the Youth Justice and Criminal Evidence Act 1999, and the Crime and Disorder Act 1998. When reporting the defendants, different reporting restrictions apply.
In Scenario 1, midway through the second half of the game between Eton Wizards and Harrow United, Eton star player Tommy Looney was fouled by Ronnie Ferdinand to concede a penalty. The referee, called Len Boakes, sent Ferdinand off the field. Ferdinand continued to abuse the ref before leaving the field of play. He then returned a few minutes later to swear at the referee before producing a knife and stabbing Len in the shoulder. Section 20 of the Offences Against the Person Act 1861 states, whoever shall unlawfully and maliciously wound or inflict any grievous bodily harm upon any person, either with or without any weapon or instrument, shall be guilty of an offence, and be convicted thereof shall be liable to imprisonment for up to 5 years. Ferdinand was charged with malicious wounding contrary to Section 20 of this Act and pleaded guilty after appearing at Melchester Youth Court on 25th of January 2012. He was sentenced to 2 years at a young offender institution. In the youth court, the defendant, victim and witness all automatically have anonymity under the Children and Young Persons Act 1933. This means that nothing can be reported that will identify anybody involved within the case. The main things that can't be reported are the name, address or school of any young person involved in the case, any particulars that may lead to his or her identification, and also any image of any youth involved. The Act also suggests naming geographical areas or adults within the case with caution, as again it may identify with those involved. In this particular case, there are lots of things that would have to be taken into account before reporting the information on the incident itself, as the reporter wouldn't be able to include any information that may identify the victim, witness or anybody involved in the case. In this example, mentioning that Harrow Recreation Ground was where it took place would be okay, providing that it's a pitch used frequently by lots of different teams, so it can't identify the two teams involved in the case. It's the same when saying the date it took place, as if it was only a game that took place on that day, then it makes the teams identifiable. Reporting the two teams involved and the fact that the game was abandoned shouldn't happen either, as again it may identify the team and the players involved. What can be mentioned though is that the victim was a referee and the injuries he sustained as part of the incident. In the court case though, as the age of the victim isn't clear, whether the victim can be identified or not is dependent on his age. If the referee was under 18, he gets anonymity like all the youths in a youth court. However, if he is over 18, he doesn't and can still be named and identified just as he would like an adult appearing in any other court. The only exception to this though would be mentioning his name would identify the teams or the juveniles involved. All of these pieces of information though could lead to jigsaw identification, where the information could be pieced together and identify the juveniles involved. A youth court isn't open to the public, so according to Section 47 of the Children and Young Persons Act 1933, only bona fide representatives of newspapers or newspaper agencies may attend. If one of those is to breach either Section 39 or Section 49, the editor, writer or publisher of any piece written about the case falling foul of this can be fined up to £5,000. An example of this happening can be found from 2007, where the Wiltshire Gazette and Herald were fined £3,000 in order to pay legal costs after identifying a 15-year-old victim of a stabbing despite an anonymity order being in place.
Scenario 2, 15-year-old Phil Revel, 17-year-old Gary Revel and 20-year-old Paul Bowles went to Melchester Park, where they spent the afternoon drinking and making a nuisance of themselves by throwing stones. Doreen Dooley was walking through the park when she was hit on the head by a hail of stones thrown by the three boys. She was taken to a nearby hospital. Melanie Dooley, Doreen's daughter, aged 13, came looking for her mother when she was accosted by the three youths. They took her into a wooded area of the park and forced her to perform a number of sexual acts during a 2-hour ordeal. Definition of rape is, quote, when a man intentionally penetrates the vagina, anus or mouth of another person with his penis, where that person does not consent to the penetration and the defendant does not reasonably believe that the person consents. Rape can be committed against a woman or a man. Only a man can be charged with committing rape, but a woman can be charged as an accomplice. The two victims are the mother, Doreen Dooley, aged 42, and her daughter Melanie Dooley, aged 13. We can't report the names of the victims as there's an automatic anonymity for complaints of sexual offences, starting immediately from the time the allegation is made, and this will last a lifetime. Section 1 of the Sexual Offences Amendment Act 1992 also states that the following can't be reported on: the victim's name, the victim's address, the identity of the school attended or any other educational establishment, the identity of the victim's workplace, finally any still or moving picture of the victim. The Sexual Offences Amendment Act 1992 states that information shouldn't be published, quote, if it is likely to lead to members of the public to identify that person as the person against whom the offence is alleged to have been committed. Also, just a note, this law has been amended by the Youth Justice and Criminal Evidence Act 1999 and also by the Sexual Offences Act 2003. Melanie Dooley is 13, so obviously she's under 18 years of age. To further protect Melanie's identity, the court can impose Section 39 of the Children and Young Persons Act 1933. Like Section 1 of the Sexual Offences Amendment Act 1992, this stops reporting on factors such as addresses, schools or workplaces. However, how Section 39 of the Children and Young Persons Act 1933 extends protection of an alleged victim is that it stops any possible identifying information to be reported on, irrespective of how likely or not that is to breach the privacy laws. We'd have to find out whether Section 39 was in place when we are reporting, because obviously that dictates the extent of the information that we can report. We should be wary of identifying a mother who is a victim of a ABH offence, as this may inadvertently identify the daughter through a process referred to as jigsaw identification. The BBC College of Journalism defines jigsaw identification as, quote, when different published/broadcast sources give individually innocuous details about a person's identity which, taken together, identify a person who should not be identified.
When reporting the defendants, different reporting restrictions apply. As it is taking place in adult court, there is no automatic restriction prohibiting the identification of people under Section 49. Therefore, 17-year-old Phil Revel is not covered by the Children and Young Persons Act 1933, which would give him anonymity. However, the court may put Section 39 in place to protect his identity. In this case, we are told not to assume that no restrictions are set in place which allows us to report on all of the trial. Although Phil is not yet an adult, it is still being tried in Crown Court because of the age of the other offenders and the topic of the crime committed. Due to jigsaw identification, we must not identify Dorian when reporting on the assault of from any of the three boys. Phil's brother Gary was 17 when the crime was committed, but has since turned 18. Therefore, he must be tried in an adult court. There is no anonymity, even though the crime was committed when he was 17. We can report on anything in the trial, however we must be careful not to reveal the identity of the victims through reporting on the defendants. The only thing we need to be cautious of when reporting the accusation of rape is defamation. Similar to Gary, Paul is also an adult, so he must be tried in a Crown Court and no anonymity restrictions will be put in place. If reporting restrictions are not kept, then this can lead to prosecution by the Attorney General. A number of people can be liable, including the proprietor, editor, publisher or media organisation equivalent. Fines are usually put in place for those who do not abide the law. These are a couple of examples of previous cases. In 2006, the Sunderland Echo was fined £2,500 and ordered to pay £2,500 in compensation to a rape victim. It published a description of the victim, who was the stepdaughter to the convicted defendant, leading to her becoming identified by people who knew the family. In 2007, the Kent Messenger Group were fined £1,000 and ordered to pay £2,500 in compensation to the victim of a sex offence. Information published allowed someone to identify her. Although there is a penalty of breach, there is also a defence which can be used by news organisations, and this is: the person accused of breaching the anonymity provisions neither suspected nor had reason to suspect that the published material would identify the victim.
4 of the members of the football team went on a spree of vandalism, shoplifting and general rowdy behaviour after the game. They appeared before Melchester Youth Court on the 20th of January 2012, where they were convicted and given probation orders. As they appeared before the youth court, it means automatic anonymity and reporting restrictions are put in place under Section 49 of the Children and Young Persons Act 1933. This is to stop juveniles being stigmatised. The Act also states that the reports of youth court proceedings must not reveal the name, address, school or photographs of a person aged under 18 who is concerned with the proceedings. In this case, all of the 4 boys are under the age of 18, therefore these things can't be reported. If this was to be breached and we happen to report one of these things or give away the identity of the boys, the maximum fine is currently £5,000. A production editor of a weekly newspaper was fined £1,000 in 2007 after being convicted. He denied it after publishing a photo of a juvenile whose eyes and nose had been blacked out but the rest of his face was visible. Automatic reporting restrictions can be lifted in certain circumstances. This can happen if the court is satisfied that it's appropriate to lift the restrictions for avoiding injustice of the child, to assist in the search for a missing, convicted or alleged young offender who's been charged with or convicted of a violent or sexual offence, and may be lifted in relation to a child or a young person who has been convicted if the court is satisfied that it's in the public interest. Because the boys all had records of antisocial behaviour, the court also made all 4 of them subject to antisocial behaviour orders under the Crime and Disorder Act 1998. These are usually given in order to amend a juvenile's behaviour, and breach of it is a criminal offence. There aren't any automatic restrictions on the media identifying a juvenile in a report to do with an ASBO given. As the court didn't impose any restrictions, we were able to report on the ASBO, which rules state that none of the boys could go into Melchester Town Centre in the company of any of the others, and also imposed a curfew requiring the boys to remain indoors after 9 p.m. However, the previous records of antisocial behaviour cannot be reported, as anonymity still applies for those. Just simply the ASBOs put in place can be reported, and the rules that go with it.